Yeah, so today we're starting with chapter 14, which is the last chapter of the book, looking at maintenance of mental health. So in the past few chapters, we've looked at, okay, mental health, how can we maintain mental health? What happens when people develop mental disorders like specific phobia and that kind of stuff? So this chapter is basically just looking at what are the specific things that we can do, behaviors, protective factors, all that kind of stuff. What are those things that we can do that will influence our mental health in a good way? So either allow us to maintain our mental health, or if we are going through mental health issues, will allow us to ease the symptoms of those health issues and relieve the symptoms of those mental health issues. So that's basically what this whole chapter is about. And these are kind of, everything in this chapter are kind of tips that we can all apply in our daily life. We don't have to have a mental disorder or mental health problem to apply these tips. These tips will just allow us to have a good amount of mental health and maintain our mental health throughout our lives, essentially. Okay, so the first thing that we all need to develop is resilience. Resilience is a type of protective factor, and almost all the things that we're going through today can be classed as protective factors. Okay, now protective factors, you might have come across this terminology if you do health and human as well. Protective factors are any factor or any kind of influence that reduces the likelihood of some harm or danger coming to you. In this case, protective factors are factors that protect us or reduce the chances of us developing a mental disorder or a mental health problem. So protective factors, in other words, most of the time they're good factors. They're factors we want to have more of in our life because they will protect and preserve us against the development of mental disorders. So the first protective factor that we're looking at is resilience. Now, resilience is your ability to cope with and adapt to stresses in life and basically bounce back from times of stress in order to restore positive mental functioning. And I think we looked a little bit at resilience when we did stress in chapter 3. Resilience is an important coping mechanism for stress because resilience is your ability that when you are hit with hard adversity, which is another word for hardship or difficulty, resilience is your ability to say, okay, this is a difficult time for me, but I'm going to try my best to get through this. And I'm going to tell myself that this too shall pass. So it's not going to last forever. This hardship will eventually go and I will be able to eventually get back to a state of normal mental functioning. Now, some people, when hardships fall onto them, they imagine the worst case scenario. They imagine that the hardship will ruin the rest of their life. They don't imagine or see themselves coming out on the other side of the tunnel unharmed or in a positive mental state. They just think that it's going to ruin the rest of their life. And that's what resilience isn't. Resilience isn't that negative thinking. It isn't that thing that, oh, this is going to destroy me. It's that hope, that feeling of hope that you have that eventually you will be able to surpass and overcome that hardship that you're going through. And eventually the hope that you will come back to a state of positive mental functioning. So it's essentially your ability to adapt and cope with stresses and how quickly you bounce back from stress, from grief, from anxiety, to come back to a state of relatively positive mental functioning. So resilience is important, and it's important because people who show resilience show a number of really positive qualities in other aspects too. So just going to go through them quickly. People who show resilience, for example, have a better ability to achieve their goals. Okay, that just camouflages. Hold on. They have a better ability to achieve their goals. And essentially they're higher in self-efficacy. Self-efficacy is this idea that what you're willing to do and what you're willing to believe and how you're willing to believe in yourself and your ability to reach your goals. That's what self-efficacy is. People who are higher in self-efficacy obviously will be more likely to achieve their goals simply because they believe that they can achieve it. So if you tell yourselves, okay, I want to lose 2 kilos, or I want to get 90% in my next stack. If you don't really believe in that, if you don't believe that you can get 90 on your next stack, you're never really going to be able to go ahead and actually realize that goal or achieve that goal. So self-efficacy is extremely important. People who are resilient are very self-efficacious or higher in self-efficacy. People who are resilient are more optimistic. They think more positively. Like I said before, they have more hope for the future. They're flexible, so they're not rigid or stubborn. They can, if something goes wrong or doesn't go their way, they don't lose hope. They're like, okay, let's try plan B, let's try plan C. So they have some level of coping flexibility there, as we learned in Unit 3. They are better able to control and manage their emotions, and they are able to form quality relationships with others. And these relationships with others that they have go on to form a very important and vital source of social support for them. Because people who are resilient sometimes they can't be resilient on their own. They need other people's support to build up their resilience. And if you have a wide network of friends or a wide network of quality relationships with people, you can turn to them when you're going through a hardship or you're going through a hard time, and they can then provide you with extra support, which again helps to build up your personal sense of resilience there. So just note any maybe 2 to 3 from this slide here, any 2 to 3 characteristics of people who show resilience. Alrighty, so moving on. The next thing that we're looking at, resilience was kind of like a factor by itself. So when we talk about resilience, we don't really class it in any of the specific protective factors like biological, psychological, social. And the reason we don't do that is that resilience is kind of like an all-encompassing factor. It kind of touches on biological factors, it touches on psychological, and it touches on social as well. Okay, so essentially we kind of treat it as a separate factor in chapter 14. And it's a factor that we go through when we looked at stress as well. So resilience is its own topic for this particular chapter. So looking at the biological protective factors now, the 2 biological protective factors, what are the things that I can do from a biological point of view, from a brain-based or body-based, something that will benefit my body or brain, that will help to protect me against the development of mental disorders in my life. And the 2 things that you can do are, number 1, adequate diet, and number 2, adequate sleep. We've already covered a lot about sleep in outcome 1 of unit 4. We haven't really covered a lot about diet, but these are some like practical tips you can try to implement into your own life as well. Okay, so the first one we're looking at is adequate diet. Now, an adequate diet is the extent to which we have a balanced diet, first of all. We know that obviously if you have a balanced diet, it's always good for your health, for your physical health, but it's also good for your mental health, because when you've got a variety of foods from different food groups, you're likely to be getting in a wider range of macro and micronutrients. So you're not likely to be deficient in any nutrients or minerals or vitamins there. And there are actually studies that have been conducted that show that sometimes people who are lower in certain nutrients or minerals or vitamins, actually they're more predisposed or they're more likely to develop mental disorders, because certain vitamins and nutrients and minerals actually support the release of neurotransmitters and hormones in the brain, like serotonin or dopamine, which are involved with obviously a good mood and mental health related symptoms there. So one example of a food, like a specific example of a food that actually helps to promote good mood, is bananas. Now, bananas actually contain an amino acid called tryptophan, and tryptophan is not just found in bananas, it's found in a lot of different foods like nuts and stuff as well. Bananas contain an amino acid called tryptophan, and what tryptophan does is that it actually, when you eat bananas, the tryptophan actually is converted into serotonin in the brain. Serotonin is one of our feel-good hormones. It's related to good mood. Okay, dopamine being another one of those. If you've ever heard like people saying that, oh, chocolate makes you feel happy, that's because chocolate actually has the same effect. But rather than converting into serotonin in the brain, chocolate actually increases your dopamine levels. And dopamine is another example of a feel-good neurotransmitter that actually promotes good mood and promotes feelings of calm and relaxation, which is probably why some people, when they are feeling upset and they eat a bit of chocolate, they kind of feel a bit better about themselves. It's not just purely psychological. It does have a biological underpinning there as well. So bananas are good for you because they obviously convert into serotonin in the brain. Chocolate is good for you because it can increase the amount of dopamine in your brain. Obviously, having an overall balanced diet is good for you. So eating chocolate 24 hours a day is not going to do anything much for your mental health, but having it now and then is not a big deal, okay, as part of a balanced diet there. Now, some foods can actually prevent poor mental health symptoms. So, for example, you might realize that when you don't drink enough water or you're like completely dehydrated, you feel really bad. Like you don't feel good. You feel physically kind of not good, but you also kind of feel mentally like you can't think properly. If someone is trying to ask you something, you snap at them. So it affects your mood as well. Okay, so drinking adequate amount of water actually makes your brain work better, because obviously you need water for all the chemical reactions in your body. It also helps you to prevent headaches from being dehydrated, and it helps you to overall feel good and feel like your body is working at its optimal level. And so because you get that good feeling physically, it helps to also reduce any mental health or poor mental functioning kind of issues you have. So drinking a good amount of water is very, very important as well. And remember, we don't just get water from drinking water from a bottle or from a jug. You can get water from like any kind of food. Like when you eat an apple, there's water in that. Watermelon, soup, tea, coffee, they all have water in them. So obviously making sure you have a good amount of fluids is quite important there. So that's how we can really look into our diets and actually make sure that we are having an adequate diet that is promoting us to have a good state of mental health. Generally, when people eat bad, have poor diets over a long period of time, it doesn't make them feel good about themselves. And, you know, their brains don't function to their best level. Their mood can be very unpredictable and erratic. So it is true that if you eat too much sugar or if you eat too much fat or any excess of a particular nutrient, it's not good for you. So it's always good to have a balanced diet, okay? Regardless of what all these like fad diets like keto and all this stuff talk about, but having a balanced diet at the end of the day is the best thing you can do for your mental health. Okay, and if you've ever done keto yourself, and hopefully you haven't because it's quite extreme, but if you've ever done keto yourself, you would realize that in the first few days, it's, you know, you're like, it's really hard, especially if you are quite accustomed to eating carbs. Not having carbs makes you like the most crankiest person on earth. So it is hard. So again, that indicates to you that having a balanced diet is the best way to go. Alrighty, so adequate sleep. Sorry, just looking at a question here. Can you get addicted to dopamine? Yes, you can get addicted to dopamine. You definitely can. In fact, there's this thing going around now that I've seen like a few YouTube videos and things on and social media. It's like, it's called the dopamine detox. So it's like you detox yourself from the things that normally bring you some kind of satisfaction or pleasure. Like for example, you know, if you eat chocolate and it always makes you feel good, you detox from that. Or if you, for example, you know, watch a certain show and that makes you feel happy, you detox yourself from that. So essentially all the things that make you feel good and promote that good mood, you detox yourself from that. So like when you get out of the detox and come back to that Netflix show or that chocolate, you start to appreciate it more. I think that's the general idea. But yeah, I don't think we need a dopamine detox. Life is too short. Just enjoy what you enjoy. Anyway, adequate sleep. So yes, you can get addicted to dopamine, but generally dopamine is good for our mental health. Okay, so adequate sleep. A person who has quality sleep will wake up feeling refreshed, rested, and ready to start the day. We know that people who don't have enough sleep, and when we learned about the affective effects of partial sleep deprivation, you would remember that it was all about the mood-related effects of not having enough sleep. So the affective effects of sleep deprivation are all to do with how not having enough sleep can affect our mental health by either making us feel very jittery or anxious, or just downright making us feel, you know, very upset or very irritable or very angry. Okay, all of those things are, I don't even draw that. Okay, all of those things are affective effects. And adequate sleep, which is having enough sleep for your age group or whatever, can actually help you to reduce those symptoms of either mental health or emotional kind of irregularities there. So when we go without sleep for periods of time, we've already learned that people do have difficulty controlling their emotions. We've also learned that they have cognitive effects. So they're not able to think clearly. They're not able to think rationally. They might make very hasty decisions that they might regret later. So not only does adequate sleep help us to promote our emotional kind of well-being, it also helps us to promote our mental well-being through allowing us to have the best emotional and cognitive functioning possible there. Okay, so that's how affective effects are shown through adequate sleep. Okay, so we have adequate sleep, we're likely to get rid of those affective effects there and have better emotions and better mental health. Alrighty, the next thing that we're looking at is psychological protective factors. And this is kind of connected to what we went through in chapter 13 with this whole, what's called that whole treatment we learned about, which was CBT. Now, cognitive behavioral strategies are not CBT, but they take one of the main ideas, the main underpinning ideas of CBT, and essentially we're able to apply cognitive behavioral strategies, not just to people who have mental disorders, but to people who are healthy, okay, from a mental point of view. We're able to apply this to anyone in the population, not just people who have mental disorders. Whereas with CBT, which is the actual treatment, cognitive behavioral therapy, this is more like extensive. So we apply this more to people who actually have a mental disorder. So that's essentially the difference. But you'll realize as we go through this topic now that cognitive behavioral strategies essentially, basically they represent everything that CBT is and everything that it is that we learned about yesterday. So cognitive behavioral strategies are methods derived from cognitive behavioral therapy, as I just mentioned. The main idea is taken from CBT. So where there is an attempt made to change negative thoughts and feelings to pave the way for behaviors that promote good mental health. So the idea is that by changing your thoughts and feelings and making them more positive, we can also make your behavior more positive or stop you from engaging in negative behaviors. So in order to actually properly use cognitive behavioral strategies, you have to do something called cognitive restructuring, which is essentially you looking at a thought and you evaluating that thought and you restructuring that thought, changing the way that thought is structured by changing, for example, a negative thought to become a little bit more positive, or changing an unhelpful thought to become more productive and helpful. So that's essentially what we try to do when we do cognitive restructuring. Remember, the word cognitive means thought, or relating to your thought processes or what you're thinking. And restructuring means structuring again. So you're taking an original thought that's already structured in your head and you're restructuring it. You're changing the structure of that thought to make it more conducive of mental health for you as a person. So you're making it more helpful. If the thought is originally unhelpful, you're making it more helpful. You're making it more constructive, not destructive, and more productive. Okay, so that's essentially the idea, to change the thought from being unhelpful to being more helpful and productive and positive for you. All right, so we're going to look at an actual example of what that might look like. So if we imagine that a person has experienced a stressful event, and let's say the stressful event is that they're not scored well enough in a cricket match to win the game. So maybe like they didn't score the number of runs that they needed to actually win the game. Okay, and the other team won. Okay, obviously they would be feeling really crap about themselves and they might feel like they let their team down. And you can imagine what kind of a negative and destructive effect that could have on their mental health and the kind of negative thinking they might be engaging in after the game is done. So let's now look at how cognitive restructuring can be used to change this boy's thought from being negative to being more positive. And I'm going to just look at that in the form of a diagram. So if this is the boy who lost the game for his team, rather than saying something like, oh my God, I lost the game for my team. Oh my God, I'm such a crap player. Oh my God, I should just get off the team. He might change his thoughts. So he might look at those, negative thoughts and he might instead change them and restructure them to be more positive. So one example might be, he might tell himself, okay, today was a bad day on the field. It did start raining as well. I can do better next time. So that's like kind of blaming it on external factors rather than putting all the blame on himself. And obviously having some hope for the future there. So that thought is also showing us resilience. I can do better next time shows a hope for the future. So that's reflecting some amount of resilience in his thought processes there. Okay. The next way that we could restructure that thought is we could say, okay, I'm disappointed that I did let my team down, but I'm also hopeful that I will help the team win in the next game. I'm going to try harder to make sure that I can help my team win the next time. So that's, again, linking to resilience. The other way that he could look at the situation would be like, you know what, I think I just need to practice and refine my skills, attend some extra training with the coach, learn from my mistakes for the next game, and just come to the next game even more pumped up, even more ready to, make up for this mistake. So rather than blaming himself, he's looking at, okay, how can I now learn from this? How can this be a productive lesson for me? Rather than my comment becoming a destructive thing for my self-esteem and for my kind of individual view of myself, I am going to make it a more constructive and productive and a learning process for myself. So this is how we take what would have originally been a negative thought, which would have really got this boy down, would have really made him feel bad, and we change it to become more positive and more productive for the individual involved and for their future in the game. So they don't lose hope, and so they don't decline or decrease in terms of their mental health. So that's what cognitive restructuring is like, simply taking a negative, unhelpful or unproductive thought and changing it and converting it into a more positive way of looking at things. It's kind of just like putting a positive spin on things. That's, in very simple terms, that's what it's like. It's looking at the bright side rather than focusing on the negatives. Okay. And the last topic we're going through for today, which will conclude chapter 14 for us, is social protective factors. And the main way in which we can maintain our mental health through social protective factors is through support from family, friends, and the community. So essentially social support. The main way in which social support helps us in terms of our mental health is, again, we've got people that from whom we can gain support. Okay, if you've got at least a few people who you know that you can rely on and you can ask for advice. If you're going through a hard time, you don't feel like you're hauling through it alone. You feel like you can actually ask them for help and you can gain assistance. Okay, whether that's monetary assistance, whether you need assistance in terms of information, whether you just need some good advice or information, obviously you feel like you can reach out to them for support. And we are going to look at the different types of support that our social networks can provide us in the next slide. Now, support from family, friends, and the community also helps to strengthen a person's social well-being. And if you remember in chapter 11, when we looked at the 3 characteristics of a mentally healthy person, which was high levels of functioning, emotional well-being, and social well-being. Those were the 3. So obviously, social support directly promotes our social well-being, which is a clear characteristic of what it is to be a mentally healthy person. Okay, so that's really common. Really a common thing that we should all be achieving and kind of like working towards, okay, having a quality kind of social network and being surrounded by people who are like reliable, who are not like toxic, who don't bring us down, people who are helpful and productive and positive for the most part, because that will directly affect your mental health and well-being. Alrighty, so the last thing we're doing, whoops, get rid of that. The last slide is looking at the types of social support that we can get from our social environment or our social contacts. So there are 4 main types or 4 main forms of social support. We use the memory tip A tie to remember them. So literally like A and then a tie. Okay, so A stands for appraisal support. The T stands for tangible assistance. The I stands for information support and the E stands for emotional support. So just quickly going through these and understanding how they're different from each other. The first one is appraisal support. Now you would have heard the word appraisal from unit 3 when we did the transactional model, primary appraisal, secondary appraisal. If you remember that model, you would remember that the word appraisal is another way of saying judge or interpret. So sometimes we have a stressor in our life and we don't have enough understanding or enough knowledge to actually judge, is this actually really stressful for me? Or am I just judging it wrong? A lot of the time, if you go through something stressful in VCE, or there's some deadline coming up or some documentation you've got to fill, if you've got an older brother or sister who's done VCE before, or you've got a friend who's just completed VCE last year or the year before, you might turn to them and say, you know what, this VTAC deadline thing is coming up. What did you do? Is this something I should be worried about? Like, you know, is this going to lead to my application getting declined or whatever? Okay, and then they might tell you, no, you're just stressing for no reason. You've judged it all wrong. It's not actually as big of a deal as you think. So you're getting another person's judgment or interpretation for something that's stressing you out that you don't have enough knowledge about. You don't have enough knowledge there to make an accurate judgment of whether you should be as worried about that thing as you are. So that's appraisal support, okay? Getting someone else's support to judge or interpret the stressor. Tangible assistance is actually getting someone to help you either physically or through some kind of a tangible. Tangible means actual, okay? Actual means some kind of an actual help or some kind of an actual assistance, okay? Whether that means that they're lending you some money. For example, if someone can't pay the rent, their friend might allow them to borrow some money from them. Okay, that is tangible assistance because money is an actual tangible resource. Other examples of tangible assistance could be asking someone to help you with chores and jobs around the house. Okay, if you're having a really hard time mentally one week and you've got like 4 kids, maybe you could drop them off with your sister or your brother or something and just have like 1 or 2 hours to yourself. That's tangible assistance because then the brother or sister of that person is actually helping to look after that child's their siblings' children, okay, so they can have some free time. and mentally relax a little. Information support is obviously when we get information about how to deal with our mental health issues. And this is mostly through either the internet, like Beyond Blue website, Headspace website, you know, all these kinds of stuff. This provides us with actual information. Okay, so remember, information support is just simply getting some kind of extra information, usually from the internet nowadays, because people don't generally get mental health information by going to a psychologist. It's mostly through online sources, okay? But information support is a good one, or through apps as well. There's a lot of mental health apps now that actually help you to get more information about mental health. And the last one is emotional support. So we can get emotional support from people around us, which essentially just means that if you've got a friend who's going through a hard time from a mental health point of view, if you want to provide them with emotional support, it doesn't mean you've got to become like a psychologist and ask them all these like questions and explore their whole history of their life. It doesn't mean that. Emotional support is as simple as just sitting down with the person and listening to them, understanding what they're going through, and basically just spending time with them to know that they are actually cared, okay? The main goal of emotional support is you want to elevate or increase that person's emotional state. If that simply means, you know, buying like a tub of Ben and Jerry's and just visiting them and just like eating ice cream together or having coffee together and just simply listening to them, even without giving advice, that is emotional support, because you simply being with that person at that point in time helps to make them feel more happy, and it helps them to feel like they are cared for and that they are loved and basically supported. So that's emotional support. Okay, and I think that does bring us to the end of this. Yeah, this brings us to the end of the chapter. Whoops, I need to get rid of all the scribbles on the screen. So, Unit 4 is complete and the book is complete. Yay. Okay, so with that, obviously, there's no time for celebration. We do have to focus on the SAC as well. Obviously, your outcome to SAC, as I mentioned at the beginning, is going to be in term 4, week 1. Now, whether we're back at school by that point or whether we're learning from home, we will still be doing the SAC on Education Perfect either way. So just start studying from now. Obviously, we will do some SAC revision as well in the next week. So just start revising the content. I have put the Unit 4 notes, the complete Unit 4 notes on the school box, so you can probably access that as well.